Hey guys, welcome to Poxega. How you doing you all? In this video we are going to see part 2 of What If Ash and Cynthia Were Couple. And please do check out story named Lost Friendships by Darkness 65. And make sure to leave a like, share and subscribe. Let's get into the video. The very next day the sun was shining brightly in the sky, its rays seeping through the windows of a certain blonde-haired champion. Cynthia slowly opened her eyes, taking in her surroundings, and then quickly sat up and then remembered what had happened the day before. She remembered how after years of looking she had finally found Ash and how they had spent the rest of the day together, but what resonated in her mind the most was what he had said to her. Ash had told her he loved her and they had shared a magical kiss. It had felt like a dream and she never wanted it to end. That was the last thing she remembered, and she was still wondering how she ended up back in her hotel room. She got up from her bed and got ready for her day. She had her first match today and she decided that she would go see Ash after it. Cynthia walked out into the living room and found her Garchomp waiting for her, so she decided to ask her about last night. "Hey Garchomp, how did I get home last night?" asked Cynthia. Cynthia's Garchomp then pointed towards the coffee table in the middle of the living room and gave Cynthia a small grin. Cynthia walked over to the table and found a note on it. She sat down and began to read it. "Dear Cynthia, I had an amazing time tonight and I hope you did too. I hope you don't mind. I asked your Garchomp to take me to your room so you could rest. Hope you slept well. I know you have a match tomorrow and I want to say good luck and that I will be there cheering for you. Love, Ash." When she finished reading the letter she smiled brightly, now sure that last night wasn't a dream. She quickly read over the note one last time and stopped at the end, "Love, Ash." She could help but feel warm when she read those words. She took a glance at the clock and noticed that her match was in a few minutes. She recalled Garchomp into her Pokeball, grabbed the rest of her things and headed out. A few minutes later Cynthia was in the tunnel that led to the field waiting for her name to be called. A few more seconds passed and finally the loudspeaker announced, "Will Miss Cynthia and Miss Sarah please report to the field?" Cynthia calmly walked out of the tunnel and onto her side of the field, looking around at the stands until she found who she was looking for. There he was, sitting in the stands with a Raichu and a Lucario sitting next to him. She was not surprised that his Pokémon were so loyal to him. Ever since she met him he had a bond like no other with his Pokémon. She glanced over at him, shot him a smile and then returned her gaze towards her colleague Flint. "What a coincidence, but you do know this won't be like those practice battles we have. Here I'm not holding back," said Cynthia. "Same goes for me Cynthia," said Flint. "Then may the best trainer win," she said as they both nodded at each other. An hour later. It had been an intense battle between Flint and Cynthia and they were both down to their last Pokémon. Cynthia had her Garchomp and Flint his Infernape. Garchomp was faring way better than Infernape and he looked like he wouldn't be able to take another attack. "Garchomp Dragon Pulse followed by Dragon Rush," yelled Cynthia. "Infernape try and dodge then use Flamethrower," yelled Flint. Infernape managed to jump to the side at the last second and then shot a Flamethrower towards Garchomp, making the dragon wince a little. Flint knew that Infernape only had one attack left and he wanted to make it count. Both Pokémon were glaring at each other when suddenly, "Infernape Full Power Flare Blitz," Flint yelled. "Garchomp Giga Impact," Cynthia yelled. Both Pokémon rushed at each other, radiating energy and fierceness. Then suddenly they collided in the middle of the field, creating a huge explosion and a huge cloud of dust. The tension was building as the trainers and the crowd were waiting to see who would emerge victorious, but one person already knew. Ash used his aura to sense which Pokémon was still standing and smiled when he realized it was Cynthia's Garchomp. The dust slowly began to clear and revealed Garchomp standing over Infernape. The crowd cheered loudly for Cynthia and for the stupendous match they had just witnessed. Both trainers returned their Pokémon, walked to the middle of the field and shook hands. Cynthia then waved to the crowd and turned to look at a certain person in the stands who was clapping and smiling at her. Moments later Cynthia was walking out of the stadium and was met with a huge crowd asking her for autographs, interviews and even dates. This was not what she wanted right now. She had been looking forward to seeing Ash right after her match, but now she had to deal with this. So after signing a few autographs and declining the interviews and date requests, she headed over to the Pokémon Center to heal her Pokémon. She entered the center and left all of her Pokemon except Garchomp and walked out of the Pokemon Center. As she walked out of the center's doors she heard someone say, "Impressive how you dealt with that crowd of people, you'll have to try that next time." Cynthia turned around and saw the person she had been looking forward to being with all day. Instead of yelling his name out loud, Cynthia ran over to Ash and enveloped him in a hug. She then looked into his hazel brown eyes and gave a small but sweet peck on the lips. "Well, it's good to see you too, Cynthia. Great battle, you were amazing," said Ash. "Thank you for being there," she said. "Why? Oh, you tired? 'Cause I was thinking of taking you somewhere to celebrate your victory," he said. "No, I'm fine. Where are we going?" she asked. "It's a surprise, but before we go, do you want to let your Gark OMP out? I think she and my Garchomp had a fun time yesterday," he said. "Of course, I still can't believe yesterday happened. It seemed like a dream," she said as she let Garchomp out. Ash leaned down and softly kissed Cynthia's lips and asked, "Does this feel like a dream?" He asked. "Yes, but it's a dream I never want to wake up from," she said. Ash called out his Garchomp and told him to take care of Cynthia's Garchomp and that he would call them if he needed to. Garchomp nodded to his trainer and friend and then both dragons lifted off and flew into the mountains. "Come on," Ash said as he took Cynthia's hand and led her towards a trail leading to the forest. A few hours later, it was a wonderful day in the wild nature of the Sinnoh region. The sun was shining above through the clear blue sky, its rays gently touching the faraway mountain range in the south. Having decided to get away from the city, Ash and Cynthia now found themselves in one of the mountain's wondrous forests. The narrow path they were on, virtually untouched, led them through the magnificent woods. Cynthia enjoyed the feeling of the fresh, cool breeze on her skin, which protected her from the afternoon heat. She relished in the sensation of soft grass on her bare feet as she trekked alongside Ash, following his lead. His awe was evident on his features. It was difficult for Cynthia not to be amazed herself. The faintly glowing thick foliage of green above offered a comforting shade over them and let in just a few trails of light through, perfectly visible amidst the shadows. The crisp air and the smell of dew made Cynthia feel relaxed and alive. Looking at either side of her, she was able to see the infinite gathering of Sinnoh's plant life continue on for miles. She could make out the distant mist in the humid forest, blurring out the silhouettes of remote trees. Every now and again, the forest resonated with the echoes of a starley's chirp, adding to the mystical atmosphere of the woods. The occasional gentle breeze even made it magical. Ash turned his head sideways to look at Cynthia, smiling at her, a gesture that she returned immediately. Ash caught her hand with his and pulled her for a brief kiss. Smile against his lips at the spontaneous gesture. They eventually parted, and after a few moments of looking into each other's eyes, Cynthia let her own wander over their surroundings once more. "It's amazing, isn't it?" she asked him. "It really is," he answered, following her gaze towards the farthest reaches of the forest. "I'm glad we were able to have this getaway," Cynthia replied with amusement. She earned herself a teasing grin from Ash, to which he got a playful shove in return. It had been at least a few hours worth of trekking so far now, as they continued walking on the smooth, grassy path. They found themselves in a rather inscrutable and secluded part of the mountain. The thick forest they were going through only provided a clear look to the other side of the narrow path, while the rest was blotted out by the tall plant life and the cover of leaves above. The wilderness offered a sense of safety and protection, even as they went on even deeper into it. It was a truly pristine location with no trail markers or signs, and it was largely why Cynthia was so excited to be there with Ash, as well as why he had suggested they go to that part of the mountains in the first place. And she was delighted that Ash was enjoying himself too, considering everything he had been through. They were discovering more of the beautiful Sinnoh nature together. The leaves above them slightly shimmered in response to the cool breeze, the green glow in an interesting mixture with the sunlight seeping through and the colorful bushes gathered around the surface. Cynthia fell out of her reverie and turned to Ash. "Are you sure we can find our way back?" she spoke, turning her head around to look at Ash with badly concealed worry. "It is not shameful to admit you are exhausted, Cynthia," he answered teasingly. "The same applies to you," Cynthia replied in a grin. "It's just that sooner or later we will have to go back. All it would take is for us to go back to that marked path we crossed earlier." But if we do get lost, I can just call Garchomp to come pick us up, said Ash. All right, just making sure, Cynthia said. But honestly, we will take a break if you're tired, Ash. Don't worry, Cynthia, Ash retorted, shaking his head, I will tell you when I am. Being out here is just so invigorating. Yeah, it really is, she concurred, sighing contentedly as she took in the environment around her once more. Despite how pleasant and easy of a walk it had been so far, Cynthia did begin to wear herself out a bit, and she looked forward to finding a place for her and Ash to relax in. Maybe they'd find a wide grassy field where she would be able to sunbathe and take a soothing rest in one of the mountain's remotest locations, and share the experience with Ash. After they made the next pass in the forest on the serpentine path that moved around the trees, Cynthia noticed that Ash had his brows furrowed. His eyes were also squinting towards something glistening in the distance. The dense plant life on either side of them blocked any passage into the depths of the woods, but what was right in front of them was enough to catch their attention, along with the faint splashing sound they heard and its subtle echoes. Several unusually steep slopes of grass surrounded what appeared to be a large lake. Tall trees around it and above on the nearby hill had their perfectly symmetrical leaves cast a shadow over the body of water, with only a few rays of light penetrating the thick foliage. It was difficult to make out anything more than that from where they were standing. But both Ash and Cynthia had subconsciously picked up the pace in excitement. As they strode on the faintly moist grassy path, careful not to step on the bushes spread around the smooth brown trunks of the upright trees. The lake revealed itself before Ash and Cynthia. It was rather big in size, reaching the foot of the tall slopes around it. There was a small cascade from the adjacent heights that splashed down on the lake quietly, sending ripples across the perfectly transparent water. Now standing above it, Ash and Cynthia were offered a view towards the even brown floor along way underneath and the many colorful plants that were scattered along its length. Cynthia gasped at the outstanding reflection of the overhead leaves, adding yet another hue to the many nuances of the water. The subtle rays of light that the trees allowed through made for fantastic luminous effects. The whole scenery before them was incredibly serene and soothing, and the sound of the waterfall wonderfully comforting. A truly gorgeous sight. Wow, this is amazing, Ash said with unmistakable surprise in his voice. Cynthia nodded involuntarily in agreement, her lips parted as a result of her own wonder. It's incredible. I never expected we would find something like this here, she replied, clearly excited herself. Me neither. We could have easily missed this, Ash answered, crouching to see his own reflection in the lake, as well as the glimpses of what lied beneath it. Cynthia bent down next to him herself, and dipped her hands in the warm water, beaming at the sensation of it brushing lightly against her arms. I love the water, she said with palpable delight. It's so soothing. And it's been such a long while since I've swam. Maybe it's high time to rectify that, Ash spoke as they shared a glance. Smiles on both of their faces. You are right. A swim is certainly what the both of us need after our lengthy walk. Cynthia replied, standing up from the water and having their look at the marvel that they just discovered. So, is it now okay for me to admit that I am exhausted, then? Cynthia answered in a grin, going up on her feet again. If you want to join me in the water, then you have to. Ash playfully told her. It's settled, then, she said, removing her coat and gently putting it down on the grass. Glancing at the faintly echoing waterfall and the reflect-edged shimmering leaves in the inviting lake, Cynthia was already impatient to get in and wasted no time stripping out of her outfit, eventually leaving only her undergarments on. Ash had discarded his coat and the rest of his outfit, and had put them down next to Cynthia's, and only had his boxers on. Cynthia's feet were already soaked in the fluid as she neared the deeper part of the lake. After a few seconds of staring at her reflection, she proceeded to dive in, leaping into the water. It was not long before she felt the rush of the liquid make contact with her body, engulfing it in warmth. The ache that she had been feeling as a result of the walk was already being replaced with amazing and soothing sensations refreshing her, the tingles in her slightly numb legs slowly evaporating. Her back, now free of the clothing she had worn before, was gently massaged by the water. All of this was enough for her to already feel at ease, her body in a perfectly relaxed state. She opened her eyes, letting them adjust for a few moments before focusing on her surroundings, taking note of just how enormous the lake really was, and what it had concealed beneath it. Not even the transparent water could show the many spherical layers of smooth reefs underneath and the lines of plants that stood at their edge. As she began swimming to explore more of the gorgeous scenery, Cynthia relished in how free her body felt. How full of life and energy it was at that moment. Any physical pains she had before were gone, all tensions had disappeared, and she felt amazing just gliding along the water, her eyes registering more of the indescribable beauty around her. The smooth floor and the rays of light from above that penetrated the water made for a breathtaking lighting effect. It illuminated the very depths of the lake, giving the many colorful plants an additional nuance to them. Each of them had thin, elongated strands that slowly rocked back and forth, and Cynthia could even feel one tickling her feet right below her. The patterns of light that came from the breaks in the thick foliage reached the floor of the lake, making the scene even more mesmerizing than any of the most beautiful sights she had ever laid eyes on. As Cynthia gently swam down to the edge of a reef, a school of crimson, beautiful pink lovedusk appeared from behind the gathering of plants. They moved past her to join a few of the buizel. The fish that had begun amassing near Cynthia hid away once again when the lake resonated with Ash's entry, who had finally went into the water himself. He wasted no time rushing towards to Cynthia, quickly flapping his legs up and down, one hand at his side while the other she had extended to activate his aura. They were surrounded by an invisible sphere, allowing the woe of them to breathe underwater effortlessly. Only the edges of Ash's power were faintly colored in blue, which was enough to illuminate whatever little was still hidden away in darkness. It gave one more tint of color to the rapturous mixture of shades in the water. Once Ash could see that Cynthia's eyes had adapted as well, he felt a smile pull at his lips upon watching her bemused expression. The fish had just shown themselves once again, and the entirety of this mystical world she had just witnessed was opened up before him. His own amazement and awe at the sight of it was something she herself was feeling. And now they had the opportunity to unravel it together. A few moments earlier, Ash watched Cynthia while she walked towards the lake, sinking her feet in the shallow water in her approach. She still wore that beautiful shy smile as she proceeded to stare down at her own reflection. It was not long before she eventually made a joyous leap towards the depths, her hands stray tched out on either side of her as she did so. The impact sent ripples across the lake and it caused a few drops of water to lightly splash Ash. He walked up closer himself, already feeling the fluid beneath his feet that lightly grazed him. He let his gaze follow Cynthia's silhouette through the transparent surface. It made for a fascinating sight amid the beams of light that penetrated the water, until she eventually disappeared somewhere even further in the depths. He wanted nothing more than to join her there, and suddenly he had an idea, so he held his breath as he subconsciously mimicked the jump Cynthia herself had made seconds ago. His body was immediately surrounded by pleasant warmth and felt incredibly light as soon as it was completely wrapped up in water. He quickly swam toward Cynthia with one arm at his side and one reaching out towards Cynthia. He touched her and saw her body being engulfed in a bright blue glow. Her brain had hardly registered that when she suddenly felt air drawn up her nostrils. Confusion hit Cynthia like Ash's aura just had. The vision before her had finally cleared up as she looked her boyfriend's way, immediately noticing his reassuring expression and slight nod of his head. On instinct, she let herself inhale, and was astounded to realize that the power that both of them were surrounded by allowed her to breathe. She felt as if he was sucking in air instead of the water that was clearly around them. The smile Ash gave her was enough to confirm it, and she couldn't help but be overwhelmed by what had just happened, still without even given a chance to take it all in. She turned in the water with ease, now both of her hands on either side of her body, which was still illuminated by Ash's aura. Her two legs were slowly flapping one against the other, which was enough to lead her to the two trails of light that stood in the center of the hidden underwater paradise. Ash felt compelled to immediately follow, completely mesmerized and awe-struck with her beauty and the way his aura gave her a heavenly glow. He used his hands to propel him towards Cynthia. When he got within inches of her, both of them now found themselves between the pair of rays in the water, which they looked up and down in wonder. The leaves above the lake lit up in response to what must have been an unusually strong wind above the surface, which left its mark in the aquatic environment. Their surroundings now had a dominant azure tint due to Ash's aura. Ash and Cynthia shared a blissful smile as an Azurill went by them, followed by an Azumarill. Ash had his eyes glued to Cynthia, who had just done an enchanting whirl in the water, now heading in the direction the Pokémon had gone to, and he couldn't help but go after her. Watching her move around and the water with alluring grace was a bewitching sight. Ash stopped in his tracks, just taking the time to observe the phenomenal blend of the remarkable water life and Cynthia herself, whose presence seemed to complete it in more ways than one. He felt his heart racing as their eyes met once again. On pure instinct, Ash began swimming towards her, his gaze still on hers while she herself approached him. She took his hand in hers as they met in the water, sending a wave of warmth within him. She started leading him towards the spherical reefs of smooth rock that had the shade of amethyst. Even when they reached it, Ash couldn't draw his focus away from Cynthia. He could only register the beauty around her on a subconscious level, insignificant in contrast to how she herself seemed to give it color and life in her movements. Made it truly magical. She had relinquished his hand to swim towards a gathering of underwater bushes of various textures. Cynthia observed the Pokémon that floated between their many elongated flowing strands. Opening her hand to touch them, she beamed at the way the tiny creatures glittered when she did. Ash himself reached out to touch the plants, taking note of how smooth and fragile they felt as they lightly brushed against his fingertips. He ended up trying to catch up with Cynthia again as she headed for one of the lower reefs on the opposite side, doing another entrancing whirl on her way there in her immense enjoyment. Having the time of his life in the water with her, he felt compelled to do the same freeing movement she had just done. He failed rather miserably, tangling his legs together awkwardly in his attempt. Her obvious amusement at the sight did not go unnoticed, and with a grin on his face, Ash found himself playfully chasing after her. Even as they went on discovering more and more of the beautiful environment in their race in the water, Ash never stopped being amazed in seeing this side of Cynthia. The way she made her way around the schools of Pokémon in their pursuit and the natural elegance of her movements was enthralling. Life around them seemed to have adapted to their presence. The Pokémon that appeared out of the lines of plants filled the empty waters as they swam close to the enchanting lights, paying no mind to Ash and Cynthia. The two explored the spherical reefs of the lake, slowly reaching the floor the further they went. The smiles on both of their faces never left either of them during their time in the wondrous waters. Ash couldn't imagine a more magical place for them to be in. The opportunity to share this experience with the one he loved most was a true bliss. For the first time in a while, Cynthia suddenly brought herself to a standstill. A few moments were needed for Ash to tear his eyes away from her to follow her own gaze and notice a hole in the lowest parts of the reef they had been swimming next to. It was positioned just above the floor of the lake and it was large enough for the two of them to go inside. The dark passageway before them was surrounded by walls of smooth rock that bore the color of amaranthine. A glimpse of mauve light was all that could be seen from their position. And it was at the very end of the narrow thoroughfare. Ash and Cynthia shared an inquisitive look between themselves. The way they beamed at each other in mutual wonder was enough to understand that both of them wanted to know what was on the other side and were eager to find out. Cynthia took hold of Ash's hand, which he had already reached out for her on instinct. The contact between them once again sent a thrill through his body, and he was certain that she had felt it herself. Her soft glance at him and the sight of her beautiful leap. The glow of his aura was enough to reveal a pore Tion of the passageway as they slowly swam alongside one another in close proximity. Ash found it difficult not to be conscious of her nearness to him in his attempt to focus on their surroundings or the approaching light they were going to. The colorful plant life that they passed on their way paled in comparison to the beauty of Cynthia's body colored in an alluring blue hue. The exotic nuance as due to the luminous underwater corridor they were now reaching the end of. When they eventually did so, Cynthia turned her head upwards to observe the partially revealed secret locale they had discovered together. She led Ash towards the surface of the water that was visible above them, their hands still intertwined as she did so. She moved with familiar grace, gently and slowly flapping her legs to propel herself forward. But the way her radiant body was illuminated from the subtle ray of light they were heading towards was absolutely spectacular. His fascination with her was only interrupted when his head eventually found itself above the water. His aura was broken off as both of them breathed in their first intakes of actual air. Soon enough, Ash was able to open his eyes and let the examine what he and Cynthia had just discovered, doing his best to keep himself afloat in the meantime. What they were in the middle of was a gorgeous cavern hidden away in the depths of the lake. He heard Cynthia gasp beside him at the sight of the breathtaking combination of colorful tinctures and water textures on the smooth asymmetrical walls. A couple of beams of sunlight stood at the center of the small cavern from the two tiny overhead cracks above, which lit up a part of the green mossy surface above the water. There was also a gathering of teal-colored bushes that had tiny glittering water drops on their thin oblong leaves. Ash and Cynthia's gazes met, both of them having spent some time to take it all in. Their fascination was reflected on their features. Ash watched as Cynthia's eyes twinkled in mirth. A wide smile spread across her face. She did not know that none of this would have been as beautiful to him if it weren't for her presence. "Ash, this is absolutely incredible." She spoke with a voice full of happiness, one that slightly echoed through the cavern. She breathed heavily, obviously worn out from their time in the water. "I have never been anywhere like this before in my life." "Me neither," he replied in a whisper, feeling breathless himself from the amazing experience that was threateningly close to overwhelming him. "It's phenomenal." Cynthia still had his hand in hers as she led both of them towards a patch of mossy ground in the farthest corner of the cavern. They gradually made their way out of the water, drops of which continued to fall down from their wet bodies. Exhaustion hit Ash like a tidal wave, who only now realized just how much time they had spent swimming together. It was worth it. Cynthia still had her feet soaked in the lake when she sat down on the smooth surface. Pulling Ash down towards her, she leaned back on her arms, her gaze locked in the scenery in front of them. Ash mimicked her position, sitting down close enough to her that their bare shoulders touched, the contact sending a shiver through him. He couldn't keep his heart from pounding way faster than it should have, which seemed to be falling in love with Cynthia all over again. They had a perfect view of the entire cavern and all of its beauty. The water textures gave it a myriad of shades whose infusion was a spectacular sight to behold, with the color of azure being the dominant one among them. The two sat together in silence for a while, both of them trying to recuperate. It was not working for Ash, who couldn't get the woman next to him out of his mind. "All of this, being here with you, it's miraculous, isn't it?" She spoke in a low, but audible voice. "It is," he replied after a few seconds of silence of them just looking at each other. Until he reached out his hand to lightly caress the side of her face, tracing his thumb along her cheek. "And so are you." Ash could make out the slightest glint in Cynthia's eyes. The boundless happiness he felt within him was reflected in her face. He found himself incapable of expressing with words just how far his love for her reached and what she meant to him, but he was hoping that she could see it in his own eyes. Time between them seemed to have stopped. The beauty of the cavern around them was no longer relevant. The echo of running water that they could hear before was deafened. There was only them. During these moments, Ash registered every subtle motion of the woman he loved. Her slightly parted mouth and the hint of lust in her look were both indicative of her apparent anticipation. Ash could not tell if seconds or minutes had passed until Cynthia eventually raised her body, leaning it towards him. His instinct was already driving him closer to her, as well. Her eyes fluttered shut in her swift approach. He barely had the time to close his own until their lips quickly collided in fervor as they shared a passionate, needy embrace that sent shivers down his spine and once again engulfing both of them with aura. "I would give everything just to stay here for eternity with you," Ash said to her sincerely. Cynthia could not prevent a blush from spreading across her face at his words. "Well, we are not in a rush to get back, are we?" she replied, turning her head around to face him and giving him a peck on the lips. "We certainly aren't," Ash answered with a grin, earning her kiss with a new surge of excitement. Neither of them knew just how much time was left to enjoy the magic of their discovery, but they were going to savor every second of the experience together. And they would definitely come back. Ash woke up early the next morning and remembered he had a match scheduled for today. He looked around and saw a few of his Pokémon resting around the clearing. The rest were most likely sleeping in the woods or had already woken up and were out exploring. Ash decided to go for a walk and begun heading towards the forest and was quickly joined by Raichu and Lucario. "Hey guys, how'd you sleep?" asked Ash. "I slept well master, thank you for asking," answered Lucario. Ash smirked at his friend's courteous manners and then asked. And you Raichu? Same here, how about you? Raichu responded. I slept okay, although I am trying to figure out who to use in today's battle, Ash answered. I'm sure you will make a good choice, Master, said Lucario. Thank you, my friend, replied Ash. The three of them kept walking through the woods making small talk as they went along when suddenly they saw a small Eevee jump out of a nearby bush. The Eevee saw Ash and quickly rushed over and hid behind him. Immediately after Eevee, a Drapion appeared a few feet away from Ash. The Drapion saw the Eevee cowering behind Ash and fired an X-Scissor towards them. Quickly without a command, Raichu jumped toward the attack and easily deflected it away with an iron tail. The Drapion roared menacingly, to which Raichu responded by making spark come out of his cheeks. The Drapion then raised its claws and fired a large number of white needles at Raichu. Raichu, quick attack, said Ash. Raichu sped towards Drapion while dodging every single one of the pin missiles. Noticing that Raichu was closing in fast, Drapion tried to grab him with her claws but narrowly missed, giving Raichu an opening. Mega Punch, Ash ordered. Raichu jumped up from the ground just below Drapion's head and struck her head fiercely with a glowing fist. The large scorpion-like Pokémon received the punch and was sent flying backward into a large tree. The Drapion slowly got up and gave Raichu a Ching look before retreating back into the forest. Good job, buddy, said Ash as he crouched down and petted Raichu. Ash then turned to the small Eevee behind him and asked, Are you okay? The small Eevee still looked a little afraid but gave Ash a small nod. Eevee began to explain, and while Ash, Raichu, and Lucario listened intently, he learned that Eevee had once had a trained and that one day trained had tried to force her to evolve. Ash frowned when he heard this. He despised people who forced their Pokémon to do something they didn't want to. Eevee told him that she had tried to tell her trainer that she did not want to evolve yet, but her trainer persisted. Then one day she had woken up finding herself alone. Her trainer had abandoned her. She had spent days looking for her trainer but was unsuccessful. Eventually Eevee found herself close to a Skorupi nest, so she went to see if they had any food to give her. Unfortunately, just as Eevee was approaching the baby Pokémon, the Mother saw her and assumed she was trying to harm her children, which led to Drapion chasing her around the forest. And then I found you and you know the rest, finished Eevee. Ash nodded and looked at the small fox-like Pokémon with sympathy. Eevee then said, Maybe if I wasn't so selfish and had agreed to evolve, I wouldn't be in this whole mess. Ash looked at Eevee and softly but sternly said, Eevee, you are not selfish. Your trainer was because he tried to make you into someone you weren't. Evolving is your choice, and whether you want to or not, everyone should respect that decision. You are who you are and no one should force you to change that. Raichu and Lucario nodded when Ash said that, agreeing with their friend and master's wisdom. Eevee looked at Ash with admiration and respect. Maybe it wasn't her fault, she thought. She looked at Ash and saw that he was the kind of friend and trainer she had always dreamed of having. Ash pet the small Eevee one more time and then said, Don't worry, I'm sure you'll find a great trainer someday. He then turned around and gestured for Lucario and Raichu to follow him when suddenly he felt something tugging on his coat. He looked back and saw Eevee and kneeled down once again. What's wrong? He asked. Eevee looked at Ash and then at the ground, pondering if she should ask him, until finally she asked. Can I come with you? Ash looked at her with a thoughtful look for a few seconds, which to Eevee felt like minutes, making her slightly regret having asked him such a question and putting him on the spot. Ash saw that Eevee was becoming slightly more nervous by the second and finally decided to give her his answer. Ash smiled and responded, It would be a privilege to have you with us, Eevee. Eevee let out the breath she had been holding and then cried out in happiness. Ash reached down to his belt and took an empty Pokeball, then held it out towards Eevee so he could catch her. Eevee looked at the Pokeball and shook her head, which took Ash by surprise. I want to battle first, she said confidently. Ash smiled and put the Pokeball back on his belt. He could see great things in store for this Eevee, so he smiled and said, Very well. I only have Raichu and Lucario with me at the moment, so who do you want to battle? Eevee looked at both Pokémon, trying to decide which one of them she would battle against. They both look powerful and she would rather go up against Raichu, considering he was closer to her size. Eevee gave both Pokémon one last look before she pointed her right paw at Raichu. Him, she stated confidently. Ash smiled when Eevee made her choice. She had seen Raichu defeat that Drapion easily and yet she didn't shy away from a battle with him. Yep, this Eevee would definitely go far. Ash looked over at Raichu and nodded. Raichu nodded back and made his way to the opposite side of where Eevee was. Okay buddy, remember she's new, so for now take it easy on her, Ash said to Raichu. Raichu nodded once again, signaling he understood. He knew that at the moment he would have to use just a small fraction of his power so he wouldn't hurt her, but in the future, well, that was yet to be seen. You may attack first Eevee, Ash stated. Eevee knew that she could not rush in without a plan. She had seen what Raichu did to that Drapion, and even if he wasn't going 100%, she knew it would be tough. But then again, what fun would there be if everything was easy? Eevee glared at Raichu and then immediately took off running, leaving a faint white trail behind her. Dodge it and use Thunder Shock, ordered Ash. Raichu waited until Eevee was mere inches from him before he quickly stepped to the left, making Eevee narrowly miss. Raichu then quickly turned and sent a wave of electricity towards her. Eevee felt the shock of the attack just as she skidded to a stop and then turned around to face the mouse once again. Eevee winced due to the electricity coursing through her body before she took off. Running once again towards him, splitting herself into many copies which were all running towards Raichu. Raichu, find her, Ash stated calmly. Raichu closed his eyes and begun sensing the area around I am, and then quickly he opened his eyes to see all the Eevee jump up in the air. Counter shield, Ash said to Raichu. Raichu quickly begun running around in a small circle while firing a continuous Thunderbolt, making a large barrier of electricity that separated the Eevee and him. Eevee saw this and panicked, but there was nothing she could do. She and her copies were already descending from their jump and would hit the electric barrier. Eevee braced herself and closed her eyes, feeling the shock of the electricity a second later. Eevee got up slowly and was wincing from the shock of the barrier. She then calmed down, closed her eyes and begun to sing a short tune. Eevee begun to shine lightly and after a few seconds stopped and now looked rejuvenated. Heal Bell, huh, interesting, Ash said to himself. Eevee smirked and quickly begun forming a dark sphere in her mouth. Raichu, block it, commanded Ash. Eevee released the shadow ball and quickly begun forming another one. One by one Eevee read off the shadow balls and one by one Raichu kept deflecting them away with his iron tail. Eevee became frustrated once again. None of her attack had hit and she was becoming exhausted. She was trying to think of a way to be able to land a hit on Raichu, and then suddenly she got an idea. She ceased her shadow ball attacks and quickly began running towards Raichu. He deflected the last shadow ball and saw Eevee had begun running towards him. He quickly jumped up and avoided the attack and came down with an iron tail. She got up as fast as she could and begun running toward Raichu again and ended with similar results. Every attempt she made was foiled by her opponent dodging and countering with an attack of his own, but she persisted. With each failed attempt Eevee looked more and more worn out until she looked like she would not be able to stand. Ash wondered why she continued with this strategy. He could see that Eevee was at the end of her limits. She was now on the opposite side of the field, struggling to stand and still looking at Raichu, not with anger but something else. Suddenly she was outlined in a faint white glow, and that's when Ash figured out her plan. Last resort, he said to himself. Eevee yelled loudly and ran full speed towards Raichu. Ash smiled and then enthusiastically said, Raichu, Iron Tail. Eevee ran faster and faster towards Raichu and yelled out loudly before she and Raichu collided. For a few moments both Pokémon were at a stalemate until Eevee pushed with whatever she had left, causing a small explosion that sent both Pokémon flying back. Raichu quickly recovered and flipped backwards in the air before landing on his forepaws. The small dust cloud quickly faded away, revealing Eevee barely standing. She looked at Raichu once again with the same look she had been giving him the whole match, a look of admiration. She smiled and then softly said, "You're strong," and then collapsed from exhaustion. Raichu raced over to the small fox-like Pokémon to see if she was injured. When he reached her, Eevee slowly sat up and looked at the older Pokémon. Raichu looked back at her and then said, "You did very well, and don't worry, one day you will be very strong as well." Eevee congratulated her. She had just met him but she already considered him a mentor. Ash approached both Pokémon with Lucario at his side and knelt down and scratched Raichu behind his ears. He then turned to Eevee and said, "You have an amazing fighting spirit and you are quite strong. I look forward to having you on my team." He then reached down to his belt and grabbed the same Pokeball he had offered her earlier, holding it out to her again. This time Eevee held out her paw and touched the ball without hesitation. A red beam surrounded her and withdrew her into the bow. It then dinged to signify a successful capture. Ash placed the Pokeball on his belt as he stood up and gestured for Raichu and Lucario to follow him. Raichu jumped on Ash's shoulder and Lucario walked by his side. "She has spirit," said Raichu as they walked back to their camp. "Indeed, I sensed a strong will in her. She will make a fine addition to our team, Master," commented Lucario. "Yes, but for now remember. She is still young and new. I would like for you to introduce her to everyone. Make her feel welcome. After all, she is one of us now," Ash said to the both of them. "Will do, Ash," answered Raichu. "Of course, Master," responded Lucario. The trio walked through the forest for a few more minutes before finally arriving at camp. The moment they walked out of the forest and into the clearing, He saw a woman dressed in black with her golden blonde hair flowing gently in the breeze. She was standing at the edge of the pond looking down at her reflection. Ash slowly and quietly walked behind her and wrapped his arms around her slender waist. She jumped slightly in surprise but then sunk into the embrace when she realized who it was. For a few seconds they remained that way, looking at the reflections in the pond before he let go and she turned around to look into his eyes. "To what do I owe the pleasure of you coming to see me?" Ash said with a small smile. Cynthia gave him a mischievous grin and said, "What do you mean? I came here to see Raichu." Raichu then jumped off Ash's shoulder and into Cynthia's arms, snickering. "Well then, by all means you two have fun," Ash said with the same grin and then turned around and slowly begun to walk away. He took a few steps before he felt his arm being grabbed. He turned around to see Cynthia with a warm smile as she said, "Of course I came to see you, silly." She then wrapped her arms around Ash's neck and closed in for a kiss, to which Ash responded by wrapping his arms around her waist and then slightly bent down to meet her lips. He remained that way for a minute before she gently pulled back and rested her head on his chest. "So where did you go off to so early?" she asked. "I wanted to take a walk and think about who I will be using in my match later today, but we ran into a situation," he answered. "What happened?" she questioned, looking up at him. Ash told Cynthia the whole story about how he was walking through the forest and helped an Eevee that was in danger, which then decided to join him. "Can I see her?" asked Cynthia with puppy dog eyes. "Of course you can, I was going to introduce her to everyone anyway. And by the way, those puppy dog eyes don't work on me," Ash stated while smirking. Ash took Eevee Pokeball from his belt and let out the small Pokémon. Eevee looked around and noticed Ash, Raichu, Lucario and a woman she didn't know. Eve looked at Cynthia and quickly ran behind Ash. "She's a little timid around new people," Ash explained to Cynthia. "It's fine, I understand, my Glaceon used to be mid as well before she evolved," Cynthia responded. Ash knelt down and petted the small fox-like Pokémon. "Eevee, I think it's time for you to meet everyone else, what do you think?" Ash asked. Eevee Midley nodded and stepped out from behind Ash. Ash let out a loud whistle and after a few seconds every one of Ash's Pokémon begun coming out of the forest. A minute later everyone was lined up and waiting for Ash to speak. Ash looked over at his Pokémon, making sure everybody was present, and then begun. "Good morning everyone, I hope you slept well because today we have a match and 3 of you will be battling, so I advise all of you to get ready in case you are the one that is picked to battle, but that is not the only reason I called you here. As I've told each and every one of you, we are family and we can depend on one another for anything and everything. And like any other family, will always keep growing, so I would like you all to meet Eevee. She is the new member of our family and I know every one of you knows what it is like to be new, so show her around and introduce yourself." Cynthia looked on as Ash addressed his Pokémon with such leadership. She was impressed that the young G-man she had fallen in love with so many years ago had grown into a great man. Ash turned to look at Cynthia and called Eevee over. "Eevee, there is someone else I would like you to meet. She is also part of our family. She is nice, smart and strong just like you. Her name is Cynthia. She's my girlfriend. said Ash as he picked up Evie and put her in Cynthia's arms. Cynthia was blushing madly when he heard Ash call her part of the family. She was speechless and all she wanted to do was kiss him right at that moment. Cynthia held Evie in her arms and was looking at the small Pokemon until suddenly she jumped up and started licking Cynthia's face. I think she likes you, Ash stated. The feeling is mutual, she said smiling. Cynthia then put Evie down and walked over next to Ash. He called Raichu and Lucario over and said, "Okay you two, I want you to take Evie and introduce her to everyone so she can get comfortable." "Right away master," answered Lucario. "We're on it Ash," responded Raichu. "Thanks guys. Me and Cynthia are going to relax until it's time to go to the arena," Ash told them. Raichu and Lucario nodded and walked over to Evie and begun showing her around. Cynthia then grabbed Ash and planted her lips on him, surprising him. It took him a few seconds until he finally begun to kiss her back, and after a few moments they stopped to catch their breath. Ash then looked down at Cynthia with a smile and asked, "Not that I'm complaining, but what was that for?" Cynthia leaned in close to Ash and whispered to him, "For making me part of the family. You always were, Evie. And when you weren't here," he said, and then gave her a kiss on the forehead. He then took her hand and they went over to the trees to relax. After some time it was finally noon and Ash knew he had to get to his match, so he called his Pokemon over and they all lined up in front of him and Cynthia. "Okay everyone, the match will be starting soon, so the three that are battling today are Floatzel, Staraptor and Scizor. Like I said, all of you will have a chance to battle, especially in the later rounds. Anyway, the match is starting soon so we should get going," Ash announced. He recalled the three Pokemon that he had chosen into their Pokeball and then said, "If you guys need me you know what to do, so relax the rest of the day, I'll be back later." Ash took Cynthia's hand and they both walked into the forest, followed by Raichu and Lucario. A couple minutes later they were standing in front of the stadium talking before the match started. "So do you know who you're up against?" asked Cynthia. "Too early now that you mention it, no I don't. I guess it will just make the match more interesting," said Ash. "Well, no matter who you're against you'll have no problem," she said. Ash looked around and noticed that everyone was already in the stadium waiting for the match to start. "Thanks Cynthia, I'll do my best," Ash said as he leaned down and gave her a quick kiss. "I'll be watching to make sure. Remember you promised me we would meet in the finals Ashy," she said to him. He nodded and they walked into the stadium with Raichu and Lucario at his side. Cynthia then hurried over to the stands hoping she could find a good seat. After a few seconds of looking she finally found a good seat, and as soon as she sat down the crowd began to cheer for the trainers coming out of the tunnel. Ash walked to look around until he saw Cynthia in the stands to his left and then turned his attention to the trainer across the field from him. The girl looked to be about 17 and was approximately 5 feet tall. She had curly hair that was let down. She wore a dark red sleeveless blouse and a black skirt that reached just above her knees. The referee walked to his position and yelled out, "It'll be a 3-on-3 battle between Red Satoshi and Kara Spencer. The winner of the match will advance to the next round. The first trainer to defeat all three of the opponent's Pokemon will be declared the winner. Ready? Begin." The girl tossed her first Pokeball, revealing a large gecko-like Pokemon with long leaves on his forearms and another leaf on his head. "Grovyle!" the Pokemon yelled. As H grabbed a Pokeball from his belt and said, "Floatzel, crush him! Floatzel, crush him!" Up in the stands a group of people were watching the battle begin when one of them said, "I hope he gets crushed out there," she said. "May, what are you talking about? From what I've seen he's a very good trainer, plus he is so cute," said Dawn. Everyone's sweat dropped when they heard the brunette say that. "Why? Oh, you know, it's amazing how you can adore a guy that insulted us just a few days ago," said Misty to Dawn. "Shish, the match is starting and I want to study this guy's moves in case I go up against him," said Max. "He won't even make it to the quarter-finals, I guarantee it," said May confidently. Back down on the field the Grovyle was glaring at the Pokemon across from him while Floatzel stood there looking unfazed and confident. "Okay Grovyle, let's start this off with Bullet Seed," shouted Kara. Grovyle let loose a constant stream of orange glowing seeds from his mouth towards Floatzel. "Aqua Jet right through them and then use Ice Beam," Ash stated calmly. Floatzel nodded, understanding what Ash meant. He was quickly surrounded in water and began running through the bullet seed attack. Once he was close enough, Floatzel jumped up in the air and charged up an ice beam attack but did not fire it. Suddenly the jet of water he was in became frozen and begun plummeting towards Grovyle. Before he could react, the frozen Floatzel struck Grovyle in the chest and sent him tumbling backwards. The impact broke Floatzel out of the ice and once again he stood there with a confident smirk. Grovyle, get up and use quick attack followed by leaf blade, Kara told Grovyle. Grovyle got up and sped towards Floatzel and extended the blades on his forearms. Water pulse on the ground and then use razor wind, Ash commanded. Floatzel formed a sphere of water in his mouth and then fired it right under himself, propelling him up in the air. Grovyle saw this and jumped up to attack. Floatzel flipped in midair and used his tails to shoot a burst of razor-sharp wind towards Grovyle, who used the blades on his arms to protect himself. Perfect, quick use Giga Impact, yelled Ash. Floatzel quickly surrounded himself in a pinkish energy with golden streaks flowing around it and descended quickly, headed for Grovyle. He looked up and saw the attack coming towards him and his eyes opened wide. Grovyle, you have to get out of there, yelled Kara. But it was too late. Floatzel's attack landed a direct hit and sent Grovyle rocketing towards the ground, making a large crater when he landed. Floatzel landed gracefully on the ground and dusted himself off. Grovyle, please get up, this is our chance. Use a full power energy ball, Kara worriedly pleaded. Grovyle slowly got to his feet and formed a large green energy ball in his mouth. Ash shook his head slowly and then said, use water pulse and follow it with ice punch. Floatzel formed a large sphere of water, fired it into the air and jumped after it. Kara looked shocked. Floatzel shouldn't have been able to attack so soon after that Giga Impact, but regained her composure and yelled, fire now. Grovyle fired the energy ball at Floatzel, who was high up in the air and stood still waiting for it to hit. On the other side of the field, Floatzel was high up in the air right behind the sphere of water he formed earlier. Floatzel charged his fist up with an ICE punch and struck the water pulse, freezing it and sending it plummeting towards the energy ball. In the middle of the field both spheres collided and exploded, forming a cloud of dust around the field. Ash took this opportunity and gave Floatzel one last order. Aqua Jet followed by Ice Beam, finish it. Floatzel nodded and took off into the cloud of dust. Seconds later a pained cry was heard and Grovyle flew out of the cloud of smoke into the opposite wall. Grovyle is unable to battle the winner as Floatzel. Red Trainer, please send out your next Pokemon, yelled the referee. The whole crowd erupted when they saw Floatzel walk out of the dust cloud unharmed. Kara returned her Grovyle and looked across the field to her opponent, praising his Pokemon and then returning it to its Pokeball. She reached down to her belt and took a Pokeball in her hand and threw it out onto the field. Luxray, show them your power, she yelled. Up in the stands a group of people were talking about what had just happened. Did you see the way that Floatzel controlled the battle? Max said excitedly. Max, why are you praising this guy? Are you forgetting that he insulted you and your Pokemon just a few days ago? May shouted at Max. May saw Max wasn't listening and became infuriated. Misty sighed and shook her head, but then she noticed Brock seemingly lost in thought. Brock, are you okay? She asked, snapping Brock out of his thoughts. Huh, oh yeah, I'm okay, just thinking about something, he said. Everyone was now looking at Brock when Dawn suddenly spoke up. What are you thinking about, Brock? Did guys notice the very first attack that Red's Floatzel made? Brock stated. Yay, it was an Aqua Jet, replied Misty. Yes, but what did it do after that? Asked Brock. Everyone begun to think, trying to recall what Brock was talking about when suddenly Dawn yelled out. It froze it. Exactly, Dawn, he froze the Aqua Jet just like Brock begun to say. Ash used to, Dawn finished sadly. Figures, he can't come up with his own strategy, so he steals them from other people. He doesn't deserve to use Ash's moves. May yelled out furiously. Calm down, May, he could have learned that move from anywhere. Now settle down, said Misty. May sat down, outraged at what she had just learned, and went back to looking at the battlefield. Look, Red is picking another Pokemon, good thing he switched out Floatzel. Cons. Idering Luxray is an electric type, declared Max. Back down on the battlefield, Ash was looking across the field to the Luxray his opponent had called out and smirked. He took a Pokeball in his hands and yelled out. Staraptor, take flight. Kara looked at the large bird Pokemon and then yelled out across the field. Apparently you don't know that flying Pokemon are weak to electric types. Ash looked at her and then motioned for her to make the first move. Luxray, let's end this quick, Thunderbolt. Kara yelled. Take it and then use wing attack, Ash said calmly. Everyone was shocked to hear him say that, but Staraptor obeyed his trainer with complete trust. Staraptor hovered feet above the ground and received the Thunderbolt head-on, wincing slightly but then quickly took off towards the Luxray. Glowing gold with the effects of the Thunderbolt and then struck the Luxray with its wing attack. Staraptor then returned to his side of the field, still glowing gold from Luxray's attack. There it is again. Ash once used that same strategy in Hoenn in a gym battle, exclaimed Brock. May was now overly outraged. This guy was stealing Ash's strategies to the letter. Staraptor used Tailwind and get close, Ash yelled. Staraptor flapped his wings, causing a huge tailwind to carry him upwards, and then at the peak of his flight he turned upside down and descended at high speeds, pulling up just BEF. Or he hit the ground and flying directly at Luxray. Quick Luxray, use Wild Charge, Kara shouted. Luxray became enveloped in a light veil of electricity and began roar. The attack looked like a Volt-Tackle but was nowhere near the power of such an attack. Wait for it, Ash said calmly. The two Pokemon sped towards each other, and when they were mere feet from each other, Ash yelled out. Now, Stara. Ptor leaned slightly to the right, making Luxray miss by just inches. Staraptor used Tailwind once again and follow with Brave Bird, Ash shouted. Once again Staraptor flew up high and descended even quicker than before, now being carried by two Tailwinds. He descended at high speeds, now glowing a dark blue. Luxray, look out, Kara yelled out. But Luxray did not have time to look behind him before Street A Raptor struck him with the Brave Bird attack, sending him tumbling across the field. Staraptor then landed in front of Ash, no longer covered in electricity, and spread his wings, letting out a loud cry. Luxray, quick attack and use Thunder Fang, Kara yelled out. Luxray quickly made his way to Staraptor and bit his wing with electrified fangs. Staraptor cried out in surprise but then heard Ash give him a command. Staraptor, close combat. Staraptor hit Luxray on the side of its head with his free wing, breaking free from the Thunder Fang attack. He then began to plummet Luxray with a flurry of hits from his wings and talons. Luxray, Thunderbolt, Kara screamed. Dodge it and use Steel Wing, Ash shouted. Luxray fired a bolt of electricity toward the now airborne Staraptor but missed by inches, allowing Staraptor to close in on Luxray. Iron Tail now Luxray, Kara commanded. Luxray flipped up in the air, making Staraptor narrowly miss, and quickly struck Staraptor with his hardened tail. Staraptor slid across the ground, picking up dust, but quickly flew up again by pushing against the ground with his wings. Thunderbolt once again Luxray, Kara yelled. Luxray shot another Thunderbolt at Staraptor, which he once again dodged. Keep going Luxray, Kara said. Staraptor, time to finish it, fly low and advance, Ash yelled. Perfect, Kara said to herself. Luxray, Wild Charge full power, she exclaimed. Luxray once again became covered in a veil of electricity and ran towards Staraptor. This time there's no escape. Staraptor Giga Impact, send him flying, Ash stated. Now only a mere 5 feet from each other, both Pokemon yelled out and collided, causing a huge explosion. Seconds later Luxray came flying out of the top of the smoke cloud, followed by Staraptor. Kara was speechless until she noticed that Luxray was unconscious and rapidly falling toward the field. Luxray, no, she screamed. Catch it, Ash ordered. Staraptor dived rapidly and caught the unconscious Pokemon on his back. The large bird flew down to midfield, set Luxray down gently and returned to his trainer's side. Luxray is unable to battle. Staraptor wins. Red trainer, please send out you last Pokemon, shouted the referee. Kara looked on in shock at what had just happened. A Pokemon who should have clearly had a disadvantage against her won by a landslide. She looked up again as she heard someone talking to her. I guess you didn't know it takes more than type's advantage to win a match, he said from across the field as he was stoking his Staraptor's feathers. He had defeated 2 of her Pokemon without him even losing one. She saw her opponent return his Staraptor to his Pokeball after thanking him, and then grabbed another, signaling that he was ready to continue. There's no way I can win this now, but I am no going down without a fight, Kara thought. She drew one last Pokeball from her belt and tossed it onto the field. Tyranitar, show them your power, she yelled enthusiastically. Ash looked at the Pokeball in his hand, and with one smooth flick of the wrist he tossed it out onto the middle of the field and said, "Scizor, finish this." From the Pokeball emerged an abnormally large Scizor. But this was no ordinary Scizor. The Scizor was a golden greenish color with dark green streaks in small parts of his body. Scizor let out a large cry after seeing his opponent and got into a battle stance. Kara W. as determined to at least defeat one of Red's Pokemon. And if anyone could, it would be Tyranitar. Tyranitar used Dark Pulse. Kara yelled enthusiastically. Cancel it out with Night Slash and follow with Vacuum Wave, said Ash. Tyranitar fired a dark stream of energy towards Scizor, who surrounded his right claw with a similar dark energy and slashed through the attack. Scizor then reared his claw back and punched the air fiercely. After a second, Tyranitar grunted and slid backwards from the strength of the attack. Tyranitar used Stone Edge, she exclaimed. Tyranitar fired a barrage of sharp rocks towards Scizor, to which Ash responded by saying, "Scizor, hold your ground." Scizor nodded and followed its trainer's commands. He braced for the attack with claws crossed in front of him, receiving every single sharp rock that was thrown. After a few seconds, Tyranitar ceased fired and Scizor let down his arms, showing that he was fine. "Scizor, Swords Dance and then Extreme Speed," Ash ordered. Scizor was enveloped in a blue glow and then immediately vanished into thin that she couldn't see Scizor. Kara yelled. Tyranitar Earthquake. Tyranitar lifted its foot up and then slammed it down hard on the ground, causing the field to shake. But Scizor was nowhere to be seen until suddenly. Bullet Punch, ordered Ash. Scizor instantly appeared behind Tyranitar and began to assault Tyranitar with a barrage of punches, all making the Pokemon cry out in pain. Tyranitar used Dragon Claw, Kara shouted alarmingly. Tyranitar's claw began to glow, but before launching her attack, Ash yelled, "Block it, use Metal Claw," followed by Brick Break. Scizor used his Metal Claw to block the attack and struck her with the other in the chest, pushing Tyranitar out to the middle of the field. "Use X Scissor," Ash said. Scizor crossed his arms and then fired the attack towards Tyranitar. Tyranitar used Dark Pulse followed by Rock Slide, said Kara. Tyranitar fired the Dark Pulse at the X Scissor and then slammed her foot on the ground, causing chunks of rock to fly up and come down on Scizor. "Use Earth Power now," Kara shouted. Once again Tyranitar stomped her foot on the ground, but this time a tower of flames erupted right under Scizor, making cry out in pain. "Okay, Tyranitar Rock Polish followed by Dragon Claw," Kara said with renewed confidence. Across the field, Ash was watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. And it had finally arrived. "Block it," Ash stated as he watched the Tyranitar approach his Scizor. Once again Scizor raised up one glowing claw and stopped Tyranitar's attack dead in its tracks. Scizor then raised his other claw and fired a large silver beam from it, sending Tyranitar flying backwards. Tyranitar used Sandstorm, Kara ordered. Tyranitar lifted its arms up and begun to raise sand from around the field until eventually a sandstorm was raging all around them. Ash sighed, shook his head and then gave Scizor a small nod, which the Pokemon returned. Scizor knew exactly what Ash meant and then closed his eyes and begun to feel the environment around him. Since all of Ash's Pokemon were trained to use Aura, Scizor could sense where everything was around him. Ash did Seaman was now able to see everything around him using his Aura vision. "Scizor, get in close and use Bullet Punch," he told Scizor through his aura. Scizor closed in on Tyranitar and begun to throw endless amounts of punches at it until he heard Ash once again. Flash Cannon. Using both claws this time, Scizor fired an enormous beam of silver energy at Tyranitar, sending the giant Pokemon flying back. No longer able to keep up the sandstorm from her exhaustion, slowly it began to dissipate, making the field visible once again. On one side of the field was Scizor standing proudly with his arms crossed. On the other side was an exhausted Tyranitar barely able to stand. "Impressive, Scizor, charge up Metal Claw," Ash stated. Scizor uncrossed his arms and readied the attack. "Tyranitar, you can do it, come on, use Hyper Beam," Kara yelled worriedly. Tyranitar roared loudly, looked at Scizor and immediately collapsed. "Tyranitar IHE winner of this match is Red Satoshi," the referee yelled out. Scizor cancelled his attack and walked back over to Ash. Ash looked at Scizor and put his hand on Scizor's shoulder and then said, "Thank you Scizor, you did great." Ash returned Scizor and looked across the field to his opponent. "You should know when your Pokémon are at their limit or else they could get hurt, and trust me, not everyone will hesitate to attack like I did," said Ash sternly. She looked at Ash and then at her Tyranitar with tears in her eyes. Ash then turned around and walked off the field with Raichu and Lucario at his side. Ash kept walking until he reached the outside of the arena. Surprisingly, there were no paparazzi or interviewers waiting for him, but he had a good idea why that was. He began walking towards the forest and was joined by Cynthia. She wrapped her arms around his right arm and said, "You did great in there like always." "Thanks," Ash replied with a small smile. "We have the rest of the day free. What do you want to do?" asked Cynthia. "We could take a walk around. I haven't explored the city since I got here," answered Ash. "That sounds like a good idea," responded Cynthia. "Okay then, just give me 1 second, said Ash and turned to Raichu and Lucario. "Hey guys, you can go and relax the rest of the day. Make sure these guys get a good rest, plus I need you two to check how Eevee is doing," he said as he handed them his Pokeballs. They both nodded and took off towards the forest. "Okay then, shall we?" asked Ash, offering his arm to Cynthia. She happily nodded and once again wrapped her arms around his as the two begun their tour of the city. Hours later. "That was delicious," exclaimed May as the group was walking out of a local restaurant. "Yeah, we could tell by how much you ate," declared Max. The brunette smacked her brother in the back of the head and sternly said, "You better not be calling me fat." "May, calm down, you're causing a scene," Misty scolded. Misty then turned back to Brock and noticed he was deep in thought. "Brock, are you okay? You barely talked at all during dinner," she asked. "I'm fine, I was just thinking about Red's match earlier," he replied. Before Misty could say anything, May immediately yelled out, "Don't talk about that jerk." "Calm down, May. There's no need to shout every time you hear the guy's name," Misty hissed. "HMPH, he, still a jerk," said May under her breath. Misty rolled her eyes and turned back to Brock. "Don't give it too much thought, Brock. Even today a lot of people watch matches from back then. It's possible some people have adopted some of his battle strategies," stated Misty. Off to the side, May was muttering, "Why can't they come up with their own strategies?" Misty shot May a glare which made her huff and quiet down again. "You're right, Misty, I'm probably overthinking it, thanks," said Brock. "Don't worry about it. Now how about we get back to looking around the city?" Misty suggested. The group kept walking through the city, enjoying the many attractions until they noticed it was becoming late and the streets were less crowded. "Well everyone, I think it's time we head back. It's getting dark and Max has a match tomorrow," Brock stated. Everyone agreed with Brock and begun heading to the Pokémon Center until Dawn suddenly stopped when she saw a certain blonde-haired champion standing next to a fountain looking up at the sky. "Hey, isn't that Cynthia?" proclaimed Dawn. The whole group turned and saw the blonde-haired beauty standing by the fountain as if waiting for someone. "We should go say hi to her," suggested Dawn. The whole group quickly agreed and Brock was quickly beginning to make his way towards Cynthia until he suddenly felt an intense pain at his left ear. "Don't you think about it, Brock, we are going over there to say hi, not so you can flirt with her," reprimanded Misty. Brock nodded and the group begun making their way over to Cynthia. They noticed a man approach Cynthia which they instantly recognized as Red. They were utterly shocked when Red approached Cynthia, wrapped his left arm around her and handed her a rose, but nothing could prepare them for what they saw next. They watched as Cynthia wrapped her arms around him and leaned up to kiss him. None of them could believe their eyes. They stood there frozen with surprise until Dawn noticed they were walking away and ran after them. Minutes earlier, the couple was walking along the streets, now enjoying the nightlife the city had to offer. They had started off by walking through the city, occasionally stopping at a few places that caught their eye. Many people looked surprised to see the Sinnoh Champion and one of the tournament's top competitors together, but luckily enough no one disturbed them. They had then enjoyed a great lunch at one of the many restaurants in the city. After lunch they wasted no time in continuing to explore the city and even enjoyed some ice cream after Cynthia decided on a flavor. And now here they were simply enjoying each other's company. The couple noticed it was Biko, Ming late and they both had matches scheduled for tomorrow. They decide to spend a few more minutes walking around before calling it a night. They walked until they came upon a fountain with an amazing design. The fountain featured the creation trio standing back to each other with a platform rising from the middle with Arceus proudly standing on it. Cynthia was admiring the fountain while Ash looked at her with a smile. "Amazing, isn't it?" asked Cynthia. "Sure is," Ash simply responded. Cynthia noticed Ash was looking at her and realized he was referring to her. Cynthia began to blush and said, "Stop it, you're making me blush." Ash wrapped Cynthia in a loving hug and softly whispered, "You look cute when you blush." Ash then saw something on the other side of the street and quickly said, "Wait here, I'll be right back." He began heading to the other side of the plaza they were in, leaving Cynthia to wait by the fountain. A few seconds later she felt an arm wrap around her and saw a beautiful red rose being handed to her. He then leaned in and whispered to her, "Every second with you is a second in paradise." Cynthia then turned, wrapped her arms around him and gave him a deep and loving kiss. They separated after a few seconds and begun walking back to the hotel, having decided to call it a night. But the night was not over yet. "Cynthia! Cynthia, wait up!" yelled out Dawn. Ash's B. Audie immediately tensed up at the sound of that voice. Cynthia quickly noticed the change in Ash's attitude and turned to see who was calling out to her. What she saw shocked and angered her. Here they were, every single person that had changed Ash's life years ago. "Hey Cynthia, how's it going?" asked Dawn. Cynthia looked at Ash, who had his head hung low, hiding his face in darkness, and then turned back to Dawn. "You need to leave right now," she sternly commanded. The whole group was shocked at what Cynthia had just said. "Wait, what? Are you okay? Is everything all right?" asked Dawn. Cynthia took a look at Ash and could feel the anger radiating from him. "I am not going to repeat myself again, leave now," she ordered. May suddenly became very angry and stomped over to Cynthia. "We don't talk for years and then you tell us to leave for no reason. I thought we were friends. I see hanging around him has made you just like him," she said, pointing at Ash. Cynthia was now enraged and was ready to let that rage out on them. "Friends? I've seen what you do to your friends, or have you all forgotten what you did 6 years ago?" she yelled. The group of 5 immediately became quiet and sadness soon be seen on their faces, but Cynthia was not done yet. "You betrayed the one person who would have done anything and everything to help you no matter the situation, but when it was your turn to help him you condemned him," she yelled, exasperated. Misty had tears in her eyes and cried out, "We were scared, okay? We were scared of what would happen to us if we sided with him. We were young and there was nothing that proved he was innocent. We regret that decision every day. You did not deserve him as your better," Cynthia declared, now with tears streaming down her face. Ash's paw. He had hoped to see them again, but now here they all were. Every person that had been there 6 years ago was once again standing around him. Then it started. The subject he had been trying to avoid came up. Moments from that day begun flashing before his eyes, and all the anger he had been suppressing for years was surfacing again. The longer the argument continued, the more his anger grew. On the outside he looked calm and collected, but inside he was fighting an internal battle. He would not let his anger control him. It had happened before and he could not risk hurting the woman he loved. And then he heard those words. "We were scared of what would happen to us." With those words his anger begun to overcome him, and now he had to get away from here before he lost control. Meanwhile, all of Ash's Pokémon had turned in for the night. All except one. Lucario was seated down on the grass with his legs crossed, meditating while he waited for his master. Suddenly he felt an immense wave of anger and pain wash over him. He had only felt such a thing from a single person before and immediately realized what this meant. He felt it once again, stronger this time, and quickly took off running in the direction of the city. "Please hold on, master. I am coming," he worriedly said to himself. "I have to go," Ash stated through gritted teeth and begun heading towards the forest. "No, wait," pleaded Cynthia as she reached out and grabbed his arm. Ash looked back at Cynthia with anger, pain and sadness all apparent on his face. "Please let me go," he said as calmly as he could. She let his arm go, and within a matter of seconds he disappeared into the forest. Cynthia stood frozen, looking towards the forest in the direction Ash took off. She then heard a deafening roar and looked up to see her and Ash's Garchomp. Both Garchomp descended and landed next to Cynthia. Ash Garchomp then saw the group of people and roared angrily at them and begun snarling at them. Leave before you anger me or Garchomp anymore, said Cynthia. They quickly turned and left, leaving Cynthia looking towards the forest in the direction Ash had ran in. Lucario was nearing the edge of the forest when he heard a very familiar roar. He sped up, and after another minute he emerged from the forest and saw his master's mate in both Garchomp. He wasted no time and quickly ran over to them. Lucario, what are you doing here? Cynthia asked, surprised. I am looking for my master. Where is he? Where did he go? Asked Lucario, exasperated. Wait, what's wrong? Is everything okay? She asked nervously. I need to get to him as soon as possible. He's in danger, Lucario stated alarmingly. Cynthia instantly became shocked and gasped. Which way did he go? Asked Lucario. Cynthia pointed in the direction Ash took off in, and Lucario quickly turned to Garchomp and said, Let's go, I need your help. Garchomp quickly nodded and got down, allowing Lucario to jump on his back. Wait, let me help you, please, Cynthia pleaded. I am sorry, but no, I cannot allow you to get hurt. He would be crushed and he would never forgive me, he said, and then signaled Garchomp to take off. The enormous dragon pushed his legs upwards with great force and took off into the sky, heading towards the forest with Lucario standing on his back. Cynthia was now immensely worried about Ash and decided that she would not stand here and do nothing. She was going to look for him. Let's go, Garchomp. We're going to find Ash, Cynthia declared. Garchomp instantly got down and let Cynthia climb on her back. Cynthia climbed on and they both took off, heading towards the forest. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you all are enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave a like, share and subscribe. Also don't forget to support author of this fanfic. So let's end this video here. Until then, see you in next video. Good, now can you tell me why that Drapion was CH?